Spotlight on Ayckbourn goes behind the scenes to look at the background and creation of some of Alan Ayckbourn's most significant plays. I'm Alan Ayckbourn's archivist, Simon Murgatroyd, and we're looking at the playwright's breakout work, Relatively Speaking. Relatively Speaking is, inarguably, one of the most significant plays in the Ayckbourn play canon. It was his first West End hit and made Alan an overnight sensation. More than 6 decades on, it continues to be one of his most produced and popular works. But where did it all begin? The answer is in one of his biggest failures. In 1962, Alan had left the Library Theatre in Scarborough to become a founding member of the Victoria Theatre in Stoke-on-Trent, alongside his mentor, Stephen Joseph. A year later, he wrote Mr. Whatnot, which became his first play to transfer into London's West End. It was a disaster. Mr. Whatnot opened in 1964 at the New Arts Theatre and barely lasted 2 weeks before closing to some of the most damning reviews of the playwright's career. Wounded by the experience, Alan contemplated never writing again and leaving theatre for good. He got a job as a radio drama producer for the BBC in Leeds, and it seemed unlikely he would return to the theatre. Except for the intervention of Stephen Joseph. Stephen had encouraged Alan to both write and direct professionally, and he patently believed Alan was throwing in his towel far too early. In October 1964, he contacted Alan and asked if he would consider writing a play for the following summer season at the Library Theatre in Scarborough. There were just 3 provisos to this request. Stephen Joseph asked me for a play which would make people laugh when their seaside summer holidays were spoilt by the rain and they came into the theatre to get dry. This seemed to me as worthwhile a reason for writing a play as any, so I tried to comply. The second proviso was the play have no more than a cast of 4 and that it would work to a production budget of £10. Allowing for inflation, that comes to approximately £200 today. Fortunately, the play was to be staged in the round, which did help to make the less than generous budget go that little bit further. Stephen's final request was far more significant though. For Mr. Whatnot, Alan had tried to break theatre convention. The lead role was mute, much of the other dialogue was nonsensical, and it was filled with surreal sequences. It was ambitious, perhaps slightly too ambitious. Now Stephen made a suggestion to Alan. I wanted to be different from the establishment, the Rattigan or Coward generation of writers, and not to be seen as another one of those old-fashioned writers. And Stephen Joseph said to me, "Why don't you just try to write a play like them, to see if you can do it?" Because, as he pointed out, it is much easier to break the rules once you know where they are and what they are. Alan reluctantly agreed to this and then promptly forgot all about it. It was, after all, 10 months away. He took up his position at the BBC in January 1965 and began a demanding job working with the influential Northern drama producer Alfred Bradley. In February, Stephen Joseph contacted Alan about the play and asked, "How is it coming along?" Alan replied, "It's fine," despite having not written a single word of the play. Come April, Stephen Joseph rang again to inquire how the play was doing and to ask for a title. Alan still hadn't written a word of the play and, perhaps worse, he didn't even have a title. Now, there's some confusion as to whether Alan or Stephen Joseph came up with it, but whatever the case, it was agreed the play would be called Meet My Mother. Not long afterwards, Alan contacted Stephen to ask if he could alter it to Meet My Father, as he felt it sounded more dynamic. Stephen agreed and urged Alan to get a move on, given rehearsals were due to start in June. Alan and his first wife, Christine Rowland, had recently leased a cottage in Collingham in West Yorkshire for his job at the BBC, and it was here that Alan intended to write the play for which he now, at least, had an idea. I had the tiniest idea for a situation wherein a young man would ask an older man whether he could marry his daughter. The twist was that the older man didn't have a daughter. Not much to go on really, but something. From this, Alan began to construct a play which would meet Stephen's provisos and the request Alan attempt to write a well-made play. It intrigued me as an exercise. I remember sitting down and trying to write a piece that was, if you like, actor-proof. A play that would have a mechanism in it that would only need the slightest of pushes to make it work. In doing so, I had to apply all my mind and technique to such an extent that I became very depressed. In fact, I kept putting it off. Alan eventually wrote the play in, apparently, a sheer frenzy in mid-May, just 2 weeks before rehearsals were due to begin. He was assisted by Christine, who edited the play and made suggestions, as well as providing copious amounts of coffee. Also along for the ride was the neighbour's cat, the rather improbably named Pamela, who had become a regular visitor to the cottage and who began to take up residence on Alan's lap as he wrote the play. This probably began Alan's lifelong affection for feline friends and also gave him the name of one of the characters, as Pamela's owner was named Sheila. Alan wrote the first draft in pencil over several midnight sessions when his children were asleep, starting with the second scene and ending with the first scene. From first draft to the final completed type manuscript, it took just 10 days. Alan finished the play and considered it rather easy and glib, and that, intriguingly, he was rather ashamed of the comedy. Despite his misgivings, he submitted it to Stephen, who was also directing the production, who he then avoided, convinced that Stephen would hate the play. He didn't. When the pair's paths next accidentally crossed in Manchester, which seemed suspicious to Alan, as Stephen should have been in the midst of rehearsing the play in Scarborough at the time, he told Alan, "You've written a very funny play." Alan still didn't believe he had, though. At this point comes the rather bizarre twist. For the world premiere of Relatively Speaking, or Meet My Father as it was, is nothing like the play we know today. Stephen may have liked the piece, but that did not stop him editing it rather brutally. For many years, Alan told the apparently apocryphal story that Stephen cut a good third of the play. As no original manuscripts were known to exist at that point, no one knew whether this was true or not. Stephen cut rather a lot of important bits because he didn't seem to mind where it was cut as long as it was cut. When he did this, you would point out that there were some important bits of information missing, but he'd just say, "Don't worry, the audience will follow it." And they generally did. In 2007, several original manuscripts for Meet My Father, including Stephen Joseph's prompt script, were found in a suitcase in a loft in Scarborough, and it completely changed the history of the play. Everything Alan had said was true. The fascinating manuscript has marker pen lines excising huge chunks, even pages from the play. It is an astonishing and fascinating script to read. All 3 scripts are held by a private collector who, as can be seen, kindly allowed the manuscripts to be scanned for the Ayckbourn archive during 2021. Despite these extraordinary cuts, Alan noted that the play still worked and that Stephen directed a strong first production. Audiences were good and appreciative of the play, and the London producer Peter Bridge brought up the director, Nigel Patrick, to Scarborough to see the play and decided to option it for the West End. Of course, what they saw was not what Alan would give them, as not only did he not want to give them the edited manuscript, he didn't even have a copy of it anyway, as he had played no part in the rehearsal or editing process. Alan gave Bridge the uncut manuscript of Meet My Father, who advised him to change the title as he deemed it very vulgar and seaside darling, rather not suitable for the West End. Alan would go on to change the title several times in the coming months, and manuscripts are held with the alternative titles Father's Day and Taken for Granted, before Alan arrived at Relatively Speaking. The play would continue to be edited and amended throughout its journey to the West End. Most of these were minor alterations, such as in the world premiere, Ginny is called Gina, which became Virginia for the West End production before changing to the now familiar Ginny. The opening scene suffered the most changes and is still the section Alan feels is the most problematic, not least because of the play's only single massive scene change taking place so early in the play, from Ginny's bedroom to the Garden of the Willows. One element that was changed for the West End, but later restored, was the bizarre request that Alan moves the first scene from the morning to the afternoon, with the director, Nigel Patrick, arguing audiences were likely to be offended by the sight of a young unmarried couple waking up in bed in the morning. Alan reluctantly agreed to the change, but after the West End, he restored the time back to the morning, returning, as the playwright argued, an Aristotelian unity to the play. Whether audiences were less offended by a couple waking up together on an afternoon rather than the morning is dubious, but intriguingly, it has been strongly argued that Relatively Speaking is likely the first West End play which depicted the sex life of an unmarried couple on stage. Given the play makes explicit the pair have been seeing each other for a number of weeks and he wakes naked in her bed at the start of the play, it's not hard to draw the conclusion they've been sleeping together. So a West End first that Alan is rarely given credit for. The largest significant change, though, was to the climax, which Alan had been tinkering with since the original Scarborough production, and which, even as the play began a pre-West End tour, he still wasn't satisfied with. As it stood, the climax was rather weak, with Sheila commenting on how Greg and Ginny are likely to have fun, but the relationship won't last. However, during the tour, Peter Bridges' assistant, Tom Earhart, who would later become Alan Ayckbourn's agent, made the suggestion the play should circle back to the unresolved issue of the slippers found by Greg at the start of the play. This genius idea prompted Alan to memorably rewrite the entire final couple of pages, leaving Philip wondering whether his wife Sheila is actually having an affair, and the audience to wonder who else has Ginny been seeing other than Philip and Greg. Relatively Speaking was unveiled in the West End at the Duke of York's Theatre on the 29th of March 1967 and was a phenomenal success. It made Alan an overnight star of the theatre and launched him into the public eye as the West End's next big thing. The play was almost unrecognisable from what had been staged in Scarborough 2 years earlier, and would later be honed even further by the playwright following the West End experience to give us the play we know today. Relatively Speaking has subsequently become something of a phenomena, one which the playwright has even occasionally resented. It has been adapted for television twice and the radio twice in the UK. It has never been out of print since 1969, and Alan even wrote his only movie screenplay for a proposed but aborted film adaptation of the work. More than that though, it is one of the most produced and popular of his works. Almost 6 decades on, it is still regularly performed around the world. And the playwright is actually quite proud of that, and the impact Relatively Speaking has had over the years on both his own career and with audiences. That's how Relatively Speaking came to be created. I hope you've enjoyed this look at the playwright's first major hit. There'll be more plays under the spotlight soon, and don't forget, in the meantime, please subscribe to the channel if you've enjoyed the videos.